We want to ask you everything about what Novartis is doing. We know you're also working as part of a major consortium with other life sciences companies and the Gates Foundation. As you're looking out across the spectrum of the industry, academia, and nonprofits, tell us, what do you think is the nearest term potential timeline for actually getting a drug that could help with COVID-19?
Well, first, thanks, Meg, for the opportunity to speak with the audience. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to express my gratitude and my admiration for all of the healthcare workers, physicians, nurses, frontline workers working so tirelessly to take on this pandemic. We view it as our role to also play our part in that fight. I think right now there's three main groups of technologies that the industry is working on. Novartis is working on some of them as well. First is looking at existing medicines that we could repurpose to either fight the virus or fight the immune response that is causing a lot of the hospitalizations and deaths that we're seeing. Those trials are currently ongoing, a huge range. I just did a look before sitting down to speak with you. There's about 15 different molecules right now between the antivirals as well as existing immunomodulatory agents as well as antimalarials that are currently in clinical trials. I think we can start to see data coming out over the course of April, hopefully with then further regulatory action in the months that follow. The second big group is coming up with novel drugs and antibodies. And there again, a lot of work ongoing, about 5 to 10 candidates already moving into the clinic. That's going to take us longer, probably towards the end of this year, before we get really compelling data. Could be sooner, but we'll see. And then, of course, the vaccines, where there's roughly about 5 to 7 candidate vaccines, more if you include vaccines in China that are either in the clinic or heading towards the clinic. That, of course, will take us into 2021, probably towards the back half of 2021, before any of those vaccines would become available.
Right. And in the earliest group of those repurposed drugs that folks are very hopeful could work against the coronavirus, in your role as a CEO, as somebody who reviews data every day at all stages, we have some very early data on things like chloroquine, on the IL-6 drugs from Regeneron, the antibodies that are being tested now for the severe patients. How would you evaluate the potential of that data from what you've been able to see so far?
Yeah, I think there's three classes of drugs that look very intriguing. First, with respect to the antimalarials, we are supporting 4 large-scale investigator-initiated trials. We're preparing to start our own randomized clinical study as well, using hydroxychloroquine, as well as supporting, through managed access programs, a range of other efforts. With that particular agent, there is preclinical evidence that it works to kill the virus. There is now very small-scale studies out of France and China which indicate it can give benefit to hospitalized patients. So I think that's one that's very intriguing. We're investing behind it. We also committed to donate 130 million doses to the U.S. and around the world as soon as we have clinical data, and we're already starting that process now. The second are the antivirals. There was initial data out in the New England Journal of Medicine with one combination. Gilead, of course, has a drug right now in clinical trials. We'll have to see, but at least there's early evidence that those drugs might have an opportunity to work against COVID. And then the last, as you point out, are these so-called immunomodulatory agents. There's the anti-IL-6. We're working with our JAK inhibitor with our partner Incyte to evaluate that. We're also evaluating one of our own drugs, canakinumab, an anti-IL-1 agent. Those are the three groups, I think, that have the opportunity to have an impact in the very near term. Probably the one that's going to be the most important to look at in terms of getting a significant supply very quickly would, of course, be hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. So we'll see what the data ultimately shows.
And Novartis has a pretty widespread role as both a developer of novel medicines and also through Sandoz, which is a major generics player. A lot of folks who track the drug supply chain are citing major concerns that we're going to start to see shortages because of issues with the shutdown in India, what's been happening in China, and also just the increased use of medicines, for example, to keep patients on ventilators. How are you looking at the supply chain and the potential for any shortages?
Yeah, right now we've been very fortunate to date. We haven't seen any supply disruptions in our supply chain. Novartis, we produce about 72 billion doses of medicine every year. We keep safety stocks. We have redundancies in our supply chain. So we're tracking it very closely. We're well aware of the situation in India and China, as well as in other parts of the world, where we source a lot of our active pharmaceutical ingredients. But so far, we haven't seen significant disruptions. I'm hopeful that countries around the world will maintain open borders because our supply chains are very interconnected. We need to be able, as a large-scale manufacturer, along with our peers, large-scale manufacturers as well, to be able to move around the various parts of the drug production process. And I'm hopeful that that will continue to be the case. We're watching it very closely. Specifically on hydroxychloroquine, we are preparing that if it were to ultimately show promise, that we can produce it in multiple sites around the world.